Here we go, folks. And good afternoon. This is the Senate Government Operations Committee meeting of Wednesday, January 29th. And we will be taking up a couple of topics today. I'd like to first welcome in Big Hartman from the Vermont Human Rights Commission, the Executive Director and General Counsel. Well, let us go around the table and introduce ourselves, and then you can introduce yourself and whoever came with you.
Great.
Senator Larry Hart from Orange County.
Yes. Allison Clarkson, Windsor District, more importantly this week, a Woodstock resident.
Brian Collmore representing the Rutland District.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Jillian.
I'm Jillian, I'm the committee assistant. Senator Tanya Vygotsky would be here from Chittenden, and I'm Senator White, and I'm from Windsor County. So thanks for coming.
And you are?
My name is Big Hartman. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the State of Vermont Human Rights Commission. This is Amanda Garces, our Director of Policy, Education, and Outreach. This is an introduction. I brought some reading materials in case you want hard copies. There's no pressure. You're not required to take them, but I thought it might be a helpful kind of guide for our conversation to go through a little bit of the hot off the press annual report. That one was just for you. I passed three.
Oh, you're
Since you got like hard copy books over there, I'm figuring you might want a hard copy of the annual report. This was also shared with the committee as far as I know. Yeah, okay. I'll just be kind of flipping through here. I'm going to just start at the beginning. The mission of the Vermont Human Rights Commission is to advance full civil and human rights in Vermont. We do that. We have three main areas of jurisdiction, which I'll get into a little bit more if you're interested to know. We enforce our anti-discrimination protections under state law in housing, place of public accommodation, and employment, but only for state employees. As you probably know, the Attorney General's Office Civil Rights Unit handles the bulk of the employment discrimination cases in the state, but for state employees, the Attorney General's office would represent the employer, so it makes more sense for our office to handle that. We pursue our mission by enforcing these three areas of the law. We do investigations, and we also have the ability to bring lawsuits in court. A big part of our role in our statute is to also see if we can facilitate settlement of disputes through serving as a go-between for the parties to try to see if we can facilitate some kind of resolution that solves the problem and hopefully prevents discrimination from occurring again. We also provide as much education and outreach as we can with only one position, a third of a position really, to do that type of work. And then we also advise on public policy regarding human rights and civil rights. At page 3, at numbered page 3, I have listed some of our recommendations for moving forward and how we can best advance our mission and our collective goal of ensuring that Vermont is a welcoming and discrimination-free place for all Vermonters. I think I'll kind of skip that page for now because it's more of a conclusion and give you a little bit more of the background. We have 5 staff members. We have 7 total staff members and 5 commissioners who are appointed by the governor, who hear cases on a monthly basis. Our chair is actually Representative Coach Christie.
Yeah.
My
seatmate for 4 years.
Nice. Within our staff, we have 3 staff attorney investigators whose primary role is to really conduct comprehensive investigations of complaints that we have vetted through an intake process. So we have an administrative position, that's the executive staff assistant, and myself, who are involved in the intake process, which I'll talk about a little bit more because it's a huge part of our work, is really processing and fielding inquiries from members of the public who believe they have been discriminated against or want to understand more what our laws say about discrimination. The newest position in our office is the senior counsel position. This is a litigator position that was just created beginning last fiscal year, and has enabled us to file and pursue much more litigation than historically we've ever been able to. Without that position, it was really the executive director who was overseeing and handling all of our litigation, which tended to mean we had one case at a time, in court. And then like several years back, there was a small fund of money that enabled us to hire private attorneys on a contract basis to represent the Human Rights Commission in some cases. We had about 4 or 5 of those that we pursued, but our numbers of enforcement actions in court have really gone up in the past year because we have the benefit now of a very experienced full-time litigator. So that's sort of our structure. And moving on to pages 5 and 6, just a little bit about our jurisdiction. So fair housing is really taking up the bulk of at least half of our time and energy. We enforce state law around fair housing, and we also have a contract with HUD to receive federal money to kind of do the federal enforcement of the Federal Fair Housing Act, which is often the same protections under both federal and state law. So if we accept a complaint that involves allegations that could also fall under federal law, we dual file it with HUD, and HUD pays us for each case that we take. And HUD will also receive their own new complaints and refer them to us to do the investigation. We are the only investigative fair housing agency in the state. And we are really feeling the crunch, especially in the past year, of the housing crisis. People are oftentimes sort of stuck more in a discriminatory housing environment. And that can be anything from harassment in housing, harassment based on a legally protected class. And I've got like little bubbles there of all the different legally protected classes in Vermont law. The majority of our housing cases tend to involve people with disabilities. So these are folks who need reasonable accommodations or better accessibility in their housing, or who may have been denied housing because they get SSDI or because of, some other discriminatory intent.
I have a child,
Yeah. That is another protected class as well under both federal and state law. The one protection that's relevant under just state law that we actually see more cases that we would like is receipt of public assistance. So if someone has one of those housing choice vouchers, we see all too often landlords will post an apartment open and say, no Section 8 housing, and just blanket refuse to accept housing or to offer housing to someone because they received that type of benefit. Even though it's guaranteed rental payments for that landlord, there's still a lot of stigma associated with that. And so that is an area where we accept those cases whenever we can, knowing that it's not legally protected under federal law. So I've listed on page 5 some of the other examples of what fair housing discrimination can look like. I will say this year, and you'll see it as we get further into this report, our fair housing cases have doubled this year in comparison to last year. And it is more than half of the new complaints that we accepted last year were in housing. And we are one of the things that is a struggle for us with the fair housing cases is these are usually pretty pressing problems for folks. They just apply for housing and got denied. Now they have no place to live. They are currently in a housing situation they can't get out of, and they're being harassed, or they don't have the reasonable accommodations that they need to be able to use and enjoy their dwelling. Unfortunately, we are not able to process those cases in a timely manner, in my opinion, at all. These cases average more than 1 year to close. Even though our HUD agreement is that we will close 50% of them within 100 days, we have nowhere near the capacity to do that. as long as I've been at the HRC for the last 3.5 years, I started as an investigator and then became executive director. We've had this constant backlog of older cases that it's just really hard to move through new ones in a timely way because you always feel this pressure of these older cases that, you know, folks are desperate for an answer and for some closure and to know one way or another, was this discrimination?
Senator Clarkson.
Big, as you know, we had a landlord tenant task force this summer. And I assume you testified. We had our first introduction of it in a joint session of Senate Economic Development and General Housing. And it's very likely to be part of our housing bill this year. And post-COVID, we've just seen a huge number of evictions and increasing challenges. And the time frame you talk about and Vermont Legal Aid is also, as you are, very engaged in solving these cases. One of the benefits we could, as we look at bringing along and balancing needs of tenants and landlords, one of the things everyone wants is resolution within 90 days, 60 days to 90 days. That is, we have to partner with the court in order to make that happen. Because the resources are probably there on the non-court side, but it is court time that is challenging. So one of the things you should know in this conversation, and I'll keep us up to date on this, but is the working with the court to identify a day every 2 weeks or something to hear landlord tenant cases would really help a lot, having specific allocated time in each jurisdiction, each county or whatever. Because I know this is a huge issue.
Yeah, and a lot of the folks that are calling our office are facing eviction, and we have to tell them that may be discriminatory, that eviction that you're facing, and we are not able to assist you with any kind of urgent issue.
So do you send them then to legal aid?
We have to provide referrals all the time, and we know that legal aid has too many cases, and their housing discrimination project is currently on pause right now. But, you know, that's an advocacy work that they do. And we are really just tasked with doing an objective investigation. And so really have a different kind of role that we can play in trying to solve the problem if we had the capacity to start working on a complaint investigation as soon as it came in. Unfortunately, it usually takes longer than 30 days for us to even process an intake and get it to the point where it's a complaint, right? Someone calls us.
And that's on you.
It's a traumatic event they're usually describing. It might be hard for them to get right to the host of landlord tenant issues that they're facing. And only a sliver of that might be discrimination within our jurisdiction. So we're trying to hone in on the facts and the dates that are required, just kind of basic pleading that we want and that HUD requires. Then we take that intake. If we're able to accept the investigation, we take that information they gave us in intake and we have our staff draft a complaint, and then that complaint has to get signed and notarized by them. It takes usually around 60 to 90 days. Some cases take even longer. Plus, people will call us, they're in a state of crisis. If we can't help them right now, they're like, I'll call you another time, you know, when I'm out of this urgent pressing issue. It's really, really hard. And and because we currently have so many people that are currently waiting for a complaint to get drafted or waiting for a callback or waiting for an intake meeting, these things just get backlogged really badly. So we try to triage and like, is this an urgent thing? But even if it is urgent, it's going to be a few months before my investigator is going to have any bandwidth to look at this case, to talk to you, to look at the documents, to conduct investigative interviews. And then months more before an investigative report could be completed.
So could you give us an idea of how many litigation cases you did last year? How many kind of went through the whole process and were resolved?
Sure, let's
without getting into, and I don't want you to breach confidentiality, but
right.
And what types of cases those were?
Absolutely. So if you want to look with me, I can, but I'm also going to just share this with you on page 10 of the annual report.
If you were going to get to it, that's fine.
No, it's great. Let's skip ahead because this is really the bulk of our work, and it's something that is, I'm really proud of how we have innovated in the past year and a half under my leadership to figure out ways to be able to process more complaints. We just know that it's needed. And so in this fiscal year, you can see that first entry of data is new formal complaints that we opened.
Mhm.
So we opened 57 new complaints. That's compared to 41 that we opened in the prior year. So we're really proud of that big jump. And then you can see 35 of those cases
Okay,
were
yeah.
fair housing cases. Right now, as we sit here today, I currently have 88 cases that are alive, that are either in an investigation status, with over 60 that are in investigation status. Another 20 or so that have had a reasonable grounds determination. Investigation was done and the commissioners decided there was reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred. And now we're in a phase where we're hoping to avoid litigation and trying to work with the parties to settle that case. We have a 6-month time period to do that. And then currently we have 15 cases that we have filed in court where we are the plaintiff. Out of all of the cases, so skipping down a little bit, we closed 33 cases through determination. We closed another 10 through settlement. That is a significant increase from the year before, but it's not enough. You can see we closed 43, we accepted 57. So we're just creating more of the backlog. And I am daily faced with the decision of, do I take this case and add to my staff stress and backlog and know it's going to be a year? Or do I turn this person down and know that they have basically no other way to pursue this claim? Almost all of the complainants we deal with are of very limited resources. The majority of them are people with disabilities. Many of them are in crisis. They don't have attorneys of their own. And without an avenue like the Human Rights Commission to do an investigation, give them access to an investigative file that we create and guide them through the process, they're just gonna live with that discrimination and go on. Very few of these people are ever going to have the means to pursue this in court themselves.
Can you explain what conciliation means?
It's a fancy word for settlement.
Oh, okay.
But that's what our statute calls it. So we like to try to use that word when we can.
So in terms of public housing or housing, it might be the landlord that says, okay, I see your point and I'll change whatever decision I might have made earlier. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's landlords in housing. It tends to be landlords and property managers. We also have some cases involving like homeowners insurance, homeowners associations or condo associations, even security hired by, a property owner can be subject to the act and can violate fair housing protection.
Okay. Thank you.
This year we did see that at the bottom line, at the bottom field here, we had definitely an increase in our total number of reasonable grounds cases. These are cases where we found, another word for it is cause. There's cause in these cases to believe that discrimination occurred. We only had 10 out of 19 cases go reasonable grounds in fiscal year 23. And this year we had 22 out of 33. So again, we're just seeing an increase in basically everything. The only thing that didn't increase this year was settlements, which means that's just more work to finish those cases out. And people are often in limbo longer. I can't really explain why we're not having more settlements in this past year, except that a lot of folks want to see our process go all the way through. They want to read the report at the end of it. They said their piece and they want the full benefit of this process. Once we get to finding reasonable grounds, we do see a higher proportion of the cases wind up settling before anything more needs to be done. And I will say already this year, we've had this fiscal year in 25, we've already had this many determinations. We're flying through our cases as quickly as we possibly can, and they just keep piling up. And we've had this many settlements, probably more already this year. So we'll see our numbers continue to increase in terms of case closures, which is great, but they are also, it's absolutely because we cannot keep up with the pace of new complaints that are coming in every day. So I currently, as I sit here today, I did a quick search of our case management system. I have 100 people in intake status right now. So I'm fielding about half of those, and the other half are fielded by an administrative staff member. And there's just no, and like, we got an article in the newspaper this week. So now I have 20 new inquiries this
Oh,
week.
sure.
Like, anytime we're in the press, all of a sudden people are like, oh, the Human Rights Commission, I'm experiencing discrimination. And it's just that much more increase for our work with no, we've had the same level of administrative and investigative staff all these years. Like,
No,
that
we added some. We added some.
I remember.
So what happened was the investigators were titled administrative law examiners, and that changed to being staff attorney investigators, which means like they're on the attorney pay plan. That's great. I think that
I
helped.
thought we added 2 positions too.
So Amanda's position was added in 2019.
Yeah.
And the litigator position was added last year. But those positions are not having an impact on our intake process or on our investigation process, right? We desperately need more intake capacity. We need a full-time intake person. Like, I don't even understand why we have functioned this long without one. What has happened is that the person in the administrative position called the executive staff assistant, that position has wound up being a little bit of a revolving door. There's such a high propensity for burnout. You're getting these cold calls every day about folks in crisis. You're trying to be trauma informed.
And there's only one person answering the phone.
Right now, it's a little bit of a shared responsibility because there's no time for one person to answer the phone. There were several months in the past year that we did not answer the phone, and we just returned calls sometimes 2 to 4 weeks later. Like, that's where the backlog has been. And then every day we're also getting at least the same number, if not more, inquiries through our inbox. People are submitting online questionnaires and emailing us about new complaints they want to file every day. And it is really, in my opinion, we are not prepared for any increase in civil rights violations that people are very concerned is likely to occur in the next few years.
Yes.
So, babe, what do you attribute the growth to? Is it just that people are more aware that you exist? Is it that our housing crisis means there's no place to move, and landlords are, with the threat of eviction, it's even more pressing? I mean, what do you attribute this growth to?
So I attribute it to a combination of factors. Yes, people are hearing about us more. We've now had an outreach policy position for 5 years. We're in the community more, we're in the news more. So I think that that's a part of it. There's also this housing crunch, and that once the eviction moratorium was lifted, we definitely saw that contribute to an increase in housing cases coming our way. And then I am fearful that there is also a little bit of emboldening of people being more outwardly discriminatory than maybe they have felt it was acceptable to be.
It is that. Sadly, yes, but I wouldn't be surprised by that.
Yes. And the reports that I'm receiving every day are truly disturbing about things that are being said to folks. Students in schools especially are really, I think the escalation of harassment incidents, both in seriousness and in like overt racism, is really, really disturbing.
And so it's
We have plenty of time.
I am expected at House General at 2.
Oh,
I
yeah,
can
you
say.
should.
I just looked at page 10 and the graphics here. Shows a lot of people with disability are being discriminated against a lot.
Oh,
That
Housing and in public accumulation and in employment.
exactly.
I'm seeing that a huge amount on this one.
That's on trend with other HRCs. In part because we have the highest population of people with disabilities in terms of protected classes, but also because folks with disabilities have additional protections under the law, like a right to reasonable accommodation, a right to have a service animal accompany you in public places. You know, there's affirmative additional rights that folks with disabilities have that other protected classes don't have.
Yeah, and then that's the second one down was race and color. It's quite a bit. Then retaliation. Public assistance and housing. Yeah, so it was kind of interesting.
Yes, and I recently was on a panel with other human rights commissions in other parts of New England, and we were the only ones who had race and color as our second most common type of complaint. And I was surprised by that as well. We do place a high enforcement priority on those types of cases, recognizing the extreme marginalization that those members of our community are facing. It is very concerning to us.
We all bleed red. Doesn't matter color. As far as I'm concerned, we all bleed red. So that's how I feel. Roman.
So I'd be happy to come back and talk to
Okay,
you more.
I don't want to keep you where you need to be.
This year, we also created a guide for complainants and respondents. We had a tiny bit of HUD outreach money. And so if you're interested, we created a plain language booklet for folks to be able to understand what our process looks like and provide some more information about that. Just because we're getting the same questions again and again about our process, and it was like, maybe we need to try to explain.
Can we get one of each of those for Tanya?
Sure, absolutely.
She's not here right now, but.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, and we are seeing a bill come through. Hopefully it will make it through the House for significantly expanding our capacity in fiscal year 26.
So your ask for us, because we're your biggest advocates probably in the Senate, will be to advocate for, what are you asking for, 2 or 3 positions?
We're asking for 2 positions
6
in
positions.
BAA. I'm asking for 6 full-time positions in next fiscal year and 2 part-time positions, just to be able to meet the needs in a timely manner.
What was in the governor's budget?
A vacancy turnover savings.
Well, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you so much for hearing me. I really appreciate it.
No, it's and just as we go through, because we all have constituents, I seem to have a lot of constituents who are engaged in the last year with you.
Mhm.
And a lot of institutions. How best do you want us to communicate with you?
Directly.
Okay, so I mean, even though you're quasi-judicial, it's always because I know the judiciary doesn't like us to ask to weigh in on cases.
I can't write our case information, all of our active complaints are confidential by law.
So we know that, but
Yeah.
we can still let you know, give you our input.
Yes, I can receive information, but I can't always give all the
Right. Okay, good. That's
specific
helpful.
information I would like. Yeah. And I can always, run data that's not about specific individuals or respondents.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks again.
All right.
Good
Thank you
luck
so
upstairs.
much.
Thanks.
Let's take are you on a tight schedule? Okay.